Welcome to Cyber Go-to-Market Girl Talk, the go-to podcast for females in cyber. As a recap, my name is Elle and I work with pre-IPO cybersecurity vendors and I help them scale their go-to-market teams across North America. And I'm very excited. We've launched season 2 after a very successful first season where we explored how circa 24% of cybersecurity is made up of females. And this season we are delving into the numbers a little bit deeper, whereby less than 1% of security vendors have any female CEOs or founders. My next guest I am very excited to introduce. We have here Vidya Raman, who is a partner at Sorenson Capital, where they typically invest between 1 to 7 million first checks into seed through Series A companies. And Vidya focuses on data, AI, ML, and cybersecurity. But I will hand over to her to make a more formal introduction. Vidya, thank you for joining my episode today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Elle, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a real pleasure. And to all your audiences, hello, wherever you're listening. Like Elle was mentioning, I am an investor. I work at a venture capital firm called Sorenson Capital. We invest in companies pre-seed through Series A. We actually have 2 funds. There's the early stage fund, and that is where I spend all of my time and energy in. And there's a growth stage fund where they invest in companies that have more than 5 million in ARR. In terms of any additional things I can share about myself, so prior to being so I've been an investor for about 5 years now, and prior to that, I have had a pretty long career in tech. I started off as a software developer back in the day, working at a tiny company called IBM, became an architect, and then I took a little segue, got into research, specifically went into biomedical research, and then went to business school, then got back into tech as a PM, product manager, and I spent the majority of my professional career as a PM. I'd worked at a wide range of companies, both in terms of sizes and spaces. I had worked in embedded software, hardware, as well as platforms. So my last role as an operator was at a company called Cloudera, where I led the machine learning and AI platform. So I did that as an operator before I switched to venture about 5 years ago. So that's my career in a nutshell.
You've got such a varied background there, and I'm curious, what made you decide to move into the venture side of the world then 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I can't say I had a grand plan. I think I have always been the kind of person, like ever since the beginning of my career and all of the other transitions that I made, I have tried to index on what I'm good at, what I'm enjoying doing, and also where I feel like I can have some gratification at the end of the day. And that has changed and shifted as my life and professional career has evolved. The things that I really, really liked about being a PM in fast growing companies and product lines was working with very strong technical teams, working in very ambiguous product spaces, and then building products, and then eventually getting those products to become very successful businesses. So that whole journey, and then that is what I really loved doing. And venture provides me the opportunity to help more than one companies do that at any given time. So that is one part of what was appealing to me. Being a PM, I was, doing it one company at a time, it felt like. And this is an opportunity to scale that in some ways, if you will. But I'm under no delusion that as if I'm being a PM for multiple companies. It's very, very far from that. Also, almost equally importantly, is the kind of impact that I felt I wanted to start having on the people who are building these products and businesses. To me, as a VC, our biggest responsibility is the returns that we are able to deliver on our LPs capital, right? That's the reason for our existence, and that is squarely my key goal. Along the way, though, what I really love and appreciate is how founders, especially first-time founders who've never done this before, how they go about this process, just looking at how they grow personally and professionally, from the point at which they start their companies to when they grow from stage to stage, and being a part of the their network, and that fosters that kind of growth and evolution in them, both professionally and personally, is for me an extremely rewarding experience. And I started seeing some of that when I was working with engineering teams back in my PM days, when, especially, when people are early professionals, and you work with them over many many years and see how they transform their careers and themselves as a product and business grows. And that is exactly what I have been very fortunate to be able to see with many of the entrepreneurs that I work with, and being part of that system that can help nurture that kind of growth is to me very, very gratifying. So, yeah, so those are the two things which made me start looking at a career in venture. And also, I would say that the last thing, which is that back in the day when I wanted to start my own company, I remember going to pitch events where there were predominantly people who did not look anything like me to whom I had to pitch. And that also had an impact on me in terms of like being able to be this person that people like me could relate with, was definitely part of a factor for why I thought it's important to do this.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and one that I would definitely love to dig into, because it's I guess a very fair assessment of back when you were looking to pitch, that you're pitching to people who, as you've just said, don't look like you. And of course that's what we're talking about here entirely in this particular season. When we first met, though, I guess starting off earlier in your career, I remember something that stuck out to me, which was that at one point, I'm sure you said that you had maybe 8 years straight of not having any female colleagues in your career, and how that even had an impact on things like when you went to have children. Normally you have that kind of camaraderie with perhaps your female colleagues and speak about what stroller you're going to get and things like that. So tell us a little bit more about what that was like, and what impact you think that had as you developed throughout your career, having very little access, I guess, to female colleagues.
Yeah, and I do want to say something up front. I also don't want to assume or even actually go and say that I don't think it's only females who obviously have kids and families and all that, or that only females talk about these things. If
Yeah.
anything, I really think it's important to encourage, people of all backgrounds and gender to be active parents. So, with that in mind, so how did not having people who look like me, who had similar shared experiences in life, how did that affect me? I don't want to say that it had a huge negative effect per se. I think I went about my life for quite some time, thinking that that was the norm. Like this is where I am, and I just tend to be surrounded by people who happen to be men, and some of them, even if they had kids, um, they had stay at home spouses, or they were not the people who were thinking of some of these questions that you mentioned, as in, like, which stroller should I buy, or, that sort of thing. I think it became clear to me only after I became a parent. And, again, before being a parent, after me, there's like such a huge shift that at least happened in my life in terms of how I'm thinking about, how to go about life, if you will. And so when I started getting into some of those conversations, uh, a funny thing is that I'd come back home and I started telling my husband what my colleagues told me we should do about, a certain situation, be it getting a stroller or, furniture or whatever. And at one point he said, "Your colleagues are weird. That is bizarre advice. You should stop talking to those people about certain things," he said. And it was very funny. But then that's when it struck me and made me realize, oh yeah, that was a bizarre piece of advice. And maybe they aren't, as close to raising a child as maybe I am. So those differences were not obvious to me in the beginning, but I think became apparent to me like just over in the course of time. So how did that have an impact specifically on work? I mean, a lot of professional women have had like weird experiences, so I won't elaborate on those negative things per se, but it did become clear to me that there are lots of differences in how we go about our life, and that your personal life and professional life are not cannot often be as compartmentalized as you might like for it to be. And this is where I began to realize that it's actually helpful to have call it allies or friends at work who may be going through similar life experiences as you. And these could be men, but maybe they're more engaged parents, and maybe you can get some tips from them as to how they go about a certain thing. Like, what do you do when both parents are on work calls at 7 in the morning? You know, how are you dividing and conquering? So I think I realized that it is actually helpful, whether you do this at work or outside, to have people who may be going through similar experiences like you, because I think we are all trying to troubleshoot and come to an optimal place, if you will. So that's one. And the second one is about role models. I began to realize how so important it was to have role models. Ideally, again, they are people who look like you and you who have similar shared life experiences, again, be it of another gender or race, that's less important. But I realized that having role models who may have either had similar experiences or having similar experience is important, because like many new parents, I was going through a crisis of confidence, of having too much to do and not having enough time, and having all those self doubts. Can I even do it? And maybe it's not in it for me anymore. And then, of course, there were a bunch of people in my circles who was telling me I should be a stay-at-home mom because that's right, those kinds of things. So I think it's I guess, yeah. So the TLDR, I realized that it's important to surround myself with people who I could learn from and who I could apply some of those learnings, and um, and basically live a more productive life.
Yeah, yeah. I think something that you mentioned there about having role models, firstly, is really important. And not just having one, but having a few different role models, and whether that's that someone has a similar background and experiences to yourself, or perhaps even if it's other people who are vastly different, but just someone that you can really resonate with in whatever way, to be able to help kind of inspire you and look up to, and perhaps even in some cases seek some mentorship. And you mentioned as well the importance of, I guess, kind of having allies around you, and I think that that's something that's a reoccurring theme with a lot of the people that I speak with, is that this by no means is a platform to bash men or, assume that they've got life easier or whatever it may be, but that actually both men and females or any gender go hand in hand collectively to really kind of support one another. And, it's just as important as having females that are kind of empowering one another. So clearly that's something that's really important to you as well.
For sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So you obviously in your job get to, I'm sure, come across some hugely talented individuals, and many of them are, I'm sure, first-time founders. And whether they're male or female, kind of really irrelevant. But I guess, what advice is it that you would share for founders out there that they should be looking to, I guess, leverage in terms of what to expect when they are working with VC firms, what's expected of them as well, and what success could look like?
For the most part, right, the basics of what makes a great venture-backed startup is what founders should keep their eyes on, which means, going after markets that are large enough in order to support the kind of exits that venture firms are looking for. Having the kind of background that gives your team an unfair advantage to take advantage of that market opportunity that you're going to pursue. So that this means it's not just about you, but also the people that you've chosen to work with. What is going to make it possible for you to have an unbelievable chance at going after that problem and doing so in the best possible way. And then really, as you start building amazing product, how are you thinking about like the ecosystem that has to come together in order to support that business? And by ecosystem, I mean it's not just your partners. I think it's also the hires, how you're going to be thinking about that. Ecosystem will also include the kind of advisors and VCs that you decide to partner with, as well as, who you decide to do business with. And basically, the rest of your journey as a startup founder is all about optimizing who you decide to work with and who you don't, because there are always going to be more people than you can accommodate as part of that journey. So it's basically all of those, key things that people often talk about when it comes to what you should pay attention to venture-backed startup. I will say that, especially because of the theme of this podcast, Elle, I will say that founders, any founder, but especially underrepresented founders, should be also equally choosy about who they decide to partner with, especially for investors. So, and I'm not saying this just because VCs are inherently bad or bigoted or anything. I think just like in the broader world, that is composed of humans, VC firms are also composed of humans, and you may end up meeting with people at amazing VC firms where you may not have the same wavelength, or maybe your values don't quite overlap, or unfortunately, there are bigoted people in the world, and some of those people may be in some of those VC firms. So, I say this mainly because I think it's important to look at this as a two-way match, and not just a venture firm picking a founder, but that the founder needs to also figure out if this is a kind of individual within a certain firm that they want to partner with. And that is important, especially as it relates to cybersecurity startups. And you quoted the data earlier. Most success stories, I mean, let alone just founders, but most success stories don't look like women. Successful CEOs don't look like a woman. So I think those may play a role in how people are biased towards female founders. So this is the reason why it is important to be selective, and it's important to suss out any yellow, red flags that you come across in your interpersonal interactions.
Yeah, I'm glad that you did mention that, because I think that and the same reason why I phrased the question very specifically in a very agnostic way, this is applicable to anybody. But there is an underrepresentation of females as CEOs and founders in cybersecurity, and that is just the stark reality, and the numbers kind of suggest that as well, or evidence that rather, I should say. So I think that it is important. I'm glad that you've kind of mentioned that in your answer as well. And certainly I know that when I have spoken with some other female CEOs and founders of cybersecurity companies, they've spoken about experiences working with VC firms, and how perhaps it can differentiate from some of their male counterparts. So I guess, not to put you on the spot, but do you recognize that could be something that could be maybe a hurdle as a female founder to come up against, that there are maybe nuances in the types of questions that they're asked for, or the evidence that they're asked to kind of give forward to be able to get funding and things like that? Or is that maybe just
100%.
one person's view?
100%. And this is just applicable to literally, pick your profession, Elle, where women are underrepresented, be it in tech, be it in venture, be it in, any profession where it is uncommon to see a woman in a certain leadership role. I'm sure, we've all faced this, right? I think there is also data to support this from some very prestigious research organizations. I don't remember which one, that shows that women who are far more qualified than men for the same role tend to get rejected even more than men do. And also, women tend to self-select themselves out of certain opportunities, thinking that the
Yep.
bar is much higher than what men with similar positions actually think. So there is a ton of research to support this on both sides, where we as women tend to, not project as much confidence as many men who may be as accomplished or even less accomplished than us. And also on the other side, wherein women are set a much higher bar than men. I have just seen this enough times that I have taken this for granted, unfortunately, like many other women. And which is why I think we feel this it can be seen as a pressure um, to have a high bar, but actually it helps us win. So I think of it more as in a positive way. I think gone are the days when I saw this as a handicap. I'm like, okay, I'm so good, or I'm going to get so good that I'm going to beat out most of the competition here. For any experienced woman professional out there, they know that the bar is going to be different, higher for them. That said, I think it's important to, which is why focus on the table stakes to start with, right? Like we discussed. And then when these other things come up, like, I have heard some people have bizarre experiences with some prospective investors where they have asked, oh, do you have kids? Or do you plan to have kids? Things of that nature. People passing some judgments around, well, do you think you can actually do this? And the implication here is that because you're a woman, startups are hard. Do you really think you can do it? So I think this is one of the reasons why it's important to suss out those kinds of biases and really not even choose to work with people like that. But now let's say you are actually in an existing relationship with investors or other employees or whatnot, where you are subject to those kinds of judgments. So what do you do about that? I think you continue to do your work, prove your worth, and then put people in their place. Sometimes I have seen some women that I have worked with, right, really call out those kinds of tendencies and just say this is none of your business or something like that. Some people, if they're comfortable doing that, do that. Or some people will just compartmentalize, at least in how they come across, they'll compartmentalize their personal and professional life, and not share a lot of details about their personal life. You have to figure out what you're comfortable with, right? But I think there are strategies and tactics that people have employed that works for them. But so there is that. And then another thing I will say that this is exactly why I think women, especially women who are founders, need to be out there and really leverage a broad network and know-how. And I think it is easy as a founder, especially, to put on the blinders and really focus on the one thing that you're working on, and only that, because there's only so many hours in a day and whatnot. But having a broad and valuable network and having the know-how of what's actually happening in the industry, which venture firms and people you can better align with, and where are your allies, I think those can come in very handy, because like we were discussing, that is an important aspect of how we can rise above the tide of the bigotry and the biases that unfortunately some of us have to go through.
Yeah. What you mentioned there about some of the types of questions that are asked of female founders or CEOs is exactly what I've experienced when I've spoken with some other founders and CEOs that they've gone through. So there's clearly an alignment there in the experience. And it feels as though that hopefully we're making strides into a less kind of biased, operation of working with investors and so forth. I think there's still a long way to go, but it definitely feels like there's a lot more positive strides.
For sure.
As a VC partner, what steps do you believe need to be taken industry-wide to increase the representation of female CEOs and co-founders in security startups? And what role can VC firms play in driving this change? I guess beyond just the financial backing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think as far as what can be done industry-wide in order to drive more participation, representation among women, I think, the kind of stuff that you're doing, Elle, is actually something that is pretty significant in hopefully supporting us in that direction. Getting more women CEOs' voices out, and because we all need those role models. I walk away inspired every time, I meet a very successful, articulate, and confident woman leader. Doesn't matter which walk in life. We all need that. And we could use more of that in every walk in life, be it in cybersecurity or otherwise. So I think making sure we promote that um, in as many public media forms as possible is one good way to do that. I also think about, there is this what you talk about, like having founders and CEOs who are underrepresented. I think of that as a last mile problem, because there is also the aspect of, what happens before that, like the first mile, right? Having enough um, people, girls, people in schools get interested in tech and in cybersecurity, and then supporting them as they progress in their professions, in whether it be in college and early career and all that, and making sure that they understand they can succeed and being able to share them role models along the way in every step of their career. I think all that is equally important too. So there is that pipeline, which I think we can collectively as a society do a lot to address that. And then your question on what venture firms can do. Look, like I said at the outset, our number one jobs is to make sure that we are investing in companies that can have the maximum return for LP's capital, regardless of the kind. And that said, we do have, I personally believe I have an obligation towards society and even civilization to make sure that 50% of the population is also continues to get more support, especially given the historical injustices and biases and whatnot. So a few things that I have personally done and will continue to do. When I speak to female founders, whether or not we invest in them, when I see language that somehow doesn't show as much confidence as it warrants in a specific situation, I tell them that, one on one in a respectful manner. I tell them that, hey, you've done amazing things. If only instead of saying this, you say that, it would just come off in a much stronger and more confident way. There's no need to really pad it with so many words and whatnot. So being candid with the people that you're meeting on a day-to-day basis, even if you're not outright investing in every single female founder that you come across, and sharing with them any actionable suggestion, advice, without offending them, is, I think, I tend to think is helpful. Now, granted, they may not agree with that, and that's up to them. That's one thing. So again, I see this as what one can control and what one cannot control. This is in my control, feedback that I can share with people, and how they act on it or whether or not they act on it is up to them. And then in terms of the language that venture firms use in assessing investment opportunities, there's this CEO quality is a very important factor in early stage investing. And a CEO can be said to be a very strong CEO or a not so strong CEO. And the word strength, right? It's a very subjective thing. Nobody is doing any quantitative evaluation on strength here. Now, granted, if they're a repeat entrepreneur, maybe you can attribute a previous exit or something like that to strength. But more often than not, it tends to come down to how the CEO projects themselves in a pitch. And I think this is where how they come across, how they portray themselves, what they're working on, that confidence is very, very important. Now, as a venture firm, and as a VC, practicing VC myself, I tend to index on that in the following way, which is that if I'm hearing a pitch from a first-time woman entrepreneur, I've come to expect that they may not show the same level of confidence as a male counterpart with a similar background. And I, by by coming into those meetings consciously, I hope to try and reduce the bias that goes into judging that founder's strength. And equally importantly, I think it's important to articulate that within the investment team, within the partnership, where maybe most of them, your other colleagues are males, it's important to articulate, if a certain team that has a woman CEO is being called as a not so strong team, ask clarifying questions. Don't just say, oh, these are all my colleagues are men and so they're bigots. No, ask the question like, hey, I'm just curious. Why did you think that that team isn't strong? Like, have your colleagues come up with justifications, because that then will make them think a little harder on how they are evaluating these teams. And if there doesn't seem to be enough basis for why a certain female-led team was considered as not being strong enough, it'll either become obvious, or if it doesn't, call it out, right? So these are some subtle things that I do and can be done. And the last piece I will mention is I love the concept of checklist. Checklist is, like it sounds, super duper boring. But there's an entire book that was just written about this by Atul Gawande, Checklist Manifesto. But the key idea there being that checklists are obviously used by surgeons, by rocket scientists for mission critical situations. I think it has a very important purpose, even from the standpoint of investing, because once we establish a framework for how we are going to evaluate companies upfront, it reduces the chance that we are going to make very subjective or widely varying and biased views on a deal by deal basis. So I think part of the answer is process and framework, being aware of inherent biases. All of this go hand in hand.
There's quite a lot that you've mentioned in there, and all some really good meaty stuff. And the first thing to call out, I think, which you said, highlighting the importance of this stemming all the way back to young people when they're in school, and being able to engage them more in, what might be deemed more male-centric subjects, whether it's technology or maths or science, whatever it may be. And this needs to be something that in the education system is really looked at, I think, personally, because let's face it, as humans, pretty much everything that we think, we feel, we do is likely stemming from something within the childhood, right? So I think that that's a really important piece, and I've always said that. The other thing that you've mentioned that you've taken maybe a personal stance on doing, which I really love, is offering the opportunity to give very candid feedback and advice to people. Obviously, they have to be open to it, and you always want to sense check first that someone's in a situation where they want to accept that feedback. But even I, as someone who is a recruitment partner, when I'm working with individuals and really, really great people who are hugely inspiring, and I'm sure are many pay grades above myself, but they are, I guess, they are specialists at what they do, and I'm a specialist what I do. So being able to impart advice on things that they might not know, I only feel as though I'm doing a service if it's something that they're open to. So I think if there are more investors out there that are listening to this, or just anyone generally who is working with any CEOs or founders who are going through the phase of practicing a pitch or pulling together a pitch and what to expect, be really candid with advice. Give any support that you can, even to your point, if you're not going to invest in them, pay it forward, so that we can really promote more people out there who this is their first time. And certainly as well with females, where maybe there is a perception that there might be less confidence. I think it's a lot of it is how you display yourself, right? How you talk,
Completely.
how you communicate. That really makes a difference. And there are a lot of very inspiring women who I've connected with who display that in a wonderful way. And, being able to look at them as role models, I think is really important. So a lot of great meaty stuff there that I think that people can really think about when they're either working with CEOs or founders, or if they are a CEO or founder, kind of what to expect. So thank you for being very gracious with your time and sharing your ideas and thoughts on this platform.
Thank you so much, Elle. The pleasure to speak to you was all mine, and thank you very much for this opportunity.